Cloudtts. Walking in the Footsteps of the Buddha. Author Thich Nhat Hanh. Book 2. Chapter 30. Bamboo Forest. It was the full moon day. The Buddha took his bowl and entered the city of Rajagaha with his 1,250 bhikkhus. They walked silently with slow, calm steps. The streets of the capital were decorated with lanterns and fresh flowers. Crowds flanked both sides of the streets to welcome the Buddha and his Sangha. When the bhikkhus came to the main crossroads, the crowd was so thick that it was impossible for the Buddha and his bhikkhus to proceed. Uruvela Kassapa was wondering what to do when a handsome young fellow appeared, singing and playing a 16-string sitar. His voice resonated like a clear bell. As he walked through the crowd singing, the people moved to the sides to let him pass. There was now a path for the Buddha and his bhikkhus to continue walking. Kassapa recognized the musician who had taken the 3 refugees with him less than a month earlier. His song expressed his deep feelings. On this fresh spring morning, the Enlightened One passes through our city with a noble community of 1,250 disciples. All are walking with slow, calm, and radiant steps. The crowds listened to the young musician as if entranced, and they looked from him to the Buddha passing before them. The singer smiled and continued to sing. Grateful for this chance to be his student, let me praise his endless love and wisdom, the path that leads to self-contentment, and the Sangha which follows the true way to awakening. The young man continued to sing and open up a path until the Buddha and all the bhikkhus reached the palace gates. Then he bowed to the Buddha and disappeared back into the crowds as quickly as he had appeared. King Bimbisara, accompanied by 6,000 attendants and guests, came out to welcome the Buddha. The king led the Buddha and the bhikkhus to the royal courtyard where spacious tents had been set up to shade the guests from the hot sun. The Buddha was given the place of honor at the center of the courtyard. All the places for the bhikkhus had been prepared with utmost care. Once the Buddha was seated, King Bimbisara invited everyone else to be seated. The king and Uruvela Kassapa sat on either side of the Buddha. Prince Ajatasattu carried a basin of water and a towel to the Buddha for him to wash his hands and feet. Other attendants brought water and towels for all the bhikkhus. After that, the vegetarian feast was laid upon the tables. The king personally placed food into the Buddha's bowl while Queen Videhi directed servants to serve the bhikkhus. The Buddha and the bhikkhus recited special gathas before eating. King Bimbisara and his royal guests maintained perfect silence throughout the meal. All 6,000 guests were impressed by the calm and joyous countenance of the Buddha and his bhikkhus. When the Buddha and all of the 1,250 bhikkhus were finished eating, their bowls were taken and washed and then returned. King Bimbisara turned towards the Buddha and joined his palms. Understanding the king's wishes, the Buddha began to teach the Dharma. He spoke about the 5 precepts as the way to create peace and happiness for one's family and all the kingdom. The first precept is do not kill. Observing this precept nourishes compassion. All living beings fear death. As we cherish our own lives, we should cherish the lives of all other beings. Not only should we refrain from taking human life, we should strive to avoid taking the lives of other species. We must live in harmony with people, animals, and plants. If we nourish a heart of love, we can reduce suffering and create a happy life. If every citizen observes the precept not to kill, the kingdom will have peace. When the people respect each other's lives, the country will prosper and be strong, and it will be safe from invasion by other countries. Even if the kingdom possesses great military force, there will be no reason to use it. Soldiers can devote time to such worthy tasks as building roads, bridges, marketplaces, and dams. The second precept is do not steal. No one has the right to take away the possessions that another has earned by his own labor. Attempting to seize another's goods violates this precept. Do not cheat others or use your influence and power to encroach on others' goods. Making profits from the sweat and labor of others violates this precept as well. If the citizens observe this precept, social equality will flower and robbing and killing will quickly cease. The third precept is avoid sexual misconduct. Sexual relations should only take place with your spouse. Observing this precept builds trust and happiness in the family and prevents unnecessary suffering to others. If you want happiness and the time and will to help your country and people, abstain from having several concubines. The fourth precept is do not lie. Do not speak words that can create division and hatred. Your words should be in accord with the truth. Yes means yes. No means no. Words have the power to create trust and happiness, or they can create misunderstanding and hatred and even lead to murder and war. Please use words with the greatest care. The fifth precept is do not drink alcohol or use other intoxicants. Alcohol and intoxicants rob the mind of clarity. When someone is intoxicated, he can cause untold suffering to himself, his family, and others. Observing this precept is to preserve health for the body and mind. This precept should be observed at all times. If your Majesty and all high-ranking officials study and observe these 5 precepts, the kingdom will benefit greatly. Your Majesty, a king stands at the helm of his country. He must live with awareness and know all that is happening in his kingdom at all times. If you see to it that those under your charge understand and observe the 5 precepts, the 5 principles of living in peace and harmony, the country of Magadha will thrive. Overcome with joy, King Bimbisara stood and bowed before the Buddha. Queen Videhi approached the Buddha, holding the hand of her son, Prince Ajatasattu. She showed the prince how to join his palms like a lotus bud and respectfully greet the Buddha. She said, "Lord Buddha, Prince Ajatasattu, and 400 other children are present today. Can you teach them about the way of awareness and love?" The queen bowed before the Buddha. The Buddha smiled. He reached out and clasped the young prince's hand. The queen turned around and motioned for the other children to come forward. They were the children of noble and wealthy families and were dressed in the finest of garments. Boys as well as girls wore golden bracelets around their wrists and ankles. The girls were dressed in shimmering saris of many colors. Prince Ajatasattu sat down by the feet of the Buddha. The Buddha thought of the poor country children he shared a picnic with so long ago beneath the rose-apple tree in Kapilavatthu. He silently promised himself that when he returned home he would seek out such children and share the teaching with them, too. The Buddha spoke to the children before him. Children, before I was a human being, I lived as earth and stones, plants, birds, and many other animals. You, too, have had past lives as earth and stones, plants, birds, and animals. Perhaps you are here before me today because of some connection we shared in a past life. Perhaps in another life we brought one another joy or sorrow. Today I would like to tell you a story that took place several thousand lifetimes ago. It is the story of a heron, a crab, a plumeria tree, and many small shrimp and fish. In that life, I was the plumeria tree. Perhaps one among you was the heron or the crab or one of the shrimp. In this story, the heron was a wicked and deceitful creature who caused death and suffering to many others. The heron made me, the plumeria tree, suffer, too. But from that suffering, I learned a great lesson, and that was, if you deceive and harm others, in turn, you will be deceived and harmed. I was a plumeria tree growing close to a fragrant, cool lotus pond. No fish lived in that pond. But not far from that pond was a shallow and stagnant pond in which many fish and shrimp and one crab lived. A heron flying overhead saw the crowded situation of the fish and shrimp and devised a scheme. He landed at the edge of their pond and stood there with a long, sad face. The fish and shrimp asked him, "Mr. Heron, what are you thinking about so seriously?" "I'm thinking about your poor lot in life. Your pond is muddy and foul. You lack adequate food. I feel terrible pity for your hard lives. Do you know of any way to help us, Mr. Heron?" asked the small creatures. "Well, if you would allow me to carry each one of you over to the lotus pond not far from here, I could release you in the cool waters there. There is plenty to eat over there. We would like to believe you, Mr. Heron, but we have never heard that herons care anything about the lot of fish or shrimp. Perhaps you only want to trick us in order to eat us up. Why are you so suspicious? You should think of me as a kind uncle. I have no reason to deceive you. There really is a large lotus pond not far from here filled with plenty of fresh, cool water. If you don't believe me, let me fly one of you over there to see for himself. Then I'll fly him back to tell you whether or not I'm telling the truth." The shrimp and fish discussed the matter at some length before at last agreeing to allow one of the elder fish to go with the heron. This fish was tough and bristly, his scales as hard as stones. He was a swift swimmer who could also maneuver well on sand. The heron picked him up in his beak and flew him to the lotus pond. He released the old fish into the cool waters and let him explore every nook and cranny of the pond. The pond was indeed spacious, cool, refreshing, and a plentiful source of food. When the heron returned him to the old pond, the fish reported all he had seen. Convinced of the heron's good intentions, the shrimp and fish begged him to fly them to the pond one by one. The crafty heron agreed. He picked up a fish in his beak and flew off. But this time, instead of releasing the fish into the pond, he landed near the plumeria tree. He placed the fish in a fork of the tree and ripped off its flesh with his beak. He tossed its bones by the plumeria's roots. Then he returned to transport another fish. He devoured it as well and discarded its bones by the foot of the plumeria tree. I was that plumeria, and I witnessed all this taking place. I was enraged, but there was nothing I could do to stop the heron. A plumeria's roots are firmly anchored in the earth. There is nothing a plumeria can do but grow branches, leaves, and flowers. It cannot run anywhere. I could not call out and warn the shrimp and fish about what was really happening. I could not even stretch my branches to prevent the heron from eating the helpless creatures. I could only witness the horrible scene. Every time the heron brought a fish in its beak and began to tear at its flesh, I was filled with pain. I felt as though my sap would dry up and my branches break. Drops of moisture like tears collected on my bark. The heron did not notice. Over a number of days, he continued to bring the fish over to devour them. When all the fish were gone, he began to eat the shrimp. The pile of bones and shells that piled up by my roots could have filled 2 large baskets. I knew that as a plumeria tree my job was to beautify the forest with my fragrant flowers. But at that moment I suffered terribly from not being able to do anything to save the shrimp and fish. If I had been a deer or a person, I could have done something. But anchored by my roots to the ground, I could not move. I vowed that if I were reborn as an animal or a human in a future life, I would devote all my efforts to protect the weak and helpless from the strong and powerful. When the heron had devoured all the shrimp and fish, only the crab remained. Still hungry, the heron said to the crab, "Nephew, I have carried all the fish and shrimp to the lotus pond where they now live happily. You are all alone here now. Let me take you to the new pond too." "How will you carry me?" asked the crab. "In my beak, just as I carried all the others." "What if I slipped out and fell?" "My shell would shatter into 100 pieces." "Don't worry. I'll carry you with utmost care." The crab thought carefully. Perhaps the heron had kept his word and truly carried all the shrimp and fish to the lotus pond. But what if he had deceived them and eaten them all? The crab devised a plan to ensure his own safety. He said to the heron, "Uncle, I'm afraid your beak is not strong enough to hold me securely. Let me wrap my claws around your neck to hold on while you fly." The heron agreed. He waited for the crab to crawl onto his neck, and then he spread his wings and flew into the air. But instead of carrying the crab to the lotus pond, he landed by the plumeria tree. "Uncle, why don't you put me down by the lotus pond?" "Why did we land here instead?" What heron would be so stupid as to carry a bunch of fish to a lotus pond? I am no benefactor, nephew. Do you see all those fish bones and shrimp shells at the foot of the plumeria? This is where your life will end, as well. Uncle, the fish and shrimp may have been easily fooled, but you can't trick me so easily. Take me to the lotus pond at once, or I will cut off your head with my claws. The crab began to dig his sharp claws into the heron's neck. Seized by sharp pain, the heron cried out, "Don't squeeze so hard. I'll take you to the lotus pond right this minute. I promise I won't try to eat you." The heron flew to the lotus pond, where it intended to let the crab down by the water's edge. But the crab did not release its hold on the heron's neck. Thinking about all the fish and shrimp so cruelly deceived by the heron, the crab dug his claws deeper and deeper into the heron's neck until he cut right through it. The heron dropped down dead and the crab crawled into the water. Children, at that time I was the plumeria tree. I witnessed all these events. I learned that if we treat others kindly, we will be treated kindly in return, but if we treat others cruelly, sooner or later, we will suffer the same fate. I vowed that in all my future lives, I would endeavor to help other beings. The children listened to the Buddha's tale with great interest. They were moved by the plumeria's pain, and they felt pity for the helpless fish and shrimp. They despised the heron's deceit and were impressed by the crab's shrewdness. King Bimbisara stood up. He joined his palms and bowed. He said, "Master, you have shared an important lesson with young and old alike. I pray that Prince Ajatasattu remembers your words. Our kingdom is blessed to have you among us. I would now like to present you and your Sangha with a gift, if you agree." The Buddha looked at the king, waiting for him to explain. After a moment of silence, the king continued, "About 2 miles north of Rajagaha, there is a large and beautiful forest known as Venuvana, bamboo forest. It is quiet and serene, cool and refreshing. Many gentle squirrels inhabit that forest. I would like to offer you and your Sangha Venuvana as a place where you can teach and practice the way. O great teacher of compassion, please accept this gift from my heart." The Buddha reflected for a moment. It was the first time the Sangha had been offered land for a monastery. Certainly his bhikkhus did need a place to dwell during the rainy season. The Buddha breathed deeply and smiled, and he nodded his head in acceptance of the king's generous gift. King Bimbisara was overjoyed. He knew that the presence of the monastery would mean that the Buddha would spend more time in Magadha. Among the many guests at the palace that day were a large number of Brahmana religious leaders. Many of them were not pleased with the king's decision, but they did not dare to say anything. The king asked for a golden vase of water. He poured the clear water over the Buddha's hands and solemnly announced, "Master, as the water in this vase pours over your hands, bamboo forest is transferred to you and your Sangha." This ritual concluded the offering of bamboo forest from the king to the Buddha. The ceremonial feast came to an end, and the Buddha and his 1,250 bhikkhus departed from the palace. Chapter 31. I will return in the spring. The very next day, the Buddha visited bamboo forest with several of his senior students. It was an ideal location for the Sangha, with nearly 100 acres of healthy bamboo groves. Many kinds of bamboo grew there. At the center of the forest, Kalandaka Lake would be a perfect place for the bhikkhus to bathe, wash their robes, and do walking meditation along the shore. Because the bamboo was so plentiful, it would be easy to build small huts for the older monks to live in. The Buddha's senior students, including Kondana, Kassapa, and Sariputta, were all delighted with bamboo forest. They began planning at once how to best organize a monastery there. The Buddha said, "The monsoon season is not a good time for travel. The bhikkhus need a place to study and practice together during the rains. Having a place like this will help the community avoid illness from exposure to the elements and also avoid stepping on the many worms and insects that are washed up on the ground during the rainy season. From now on, I would like the bhikkhus to return to a common place at the beginning of every rainy season. We can ask lay disciples of the area to bring food offerings during the 3 months of retreat. The lay disciples will also benefit from the teachings offered by the bhikkhus." Thus, the tradition of the rainy season retreat began. Under Moggallana's supervision, the younger bhikkhus built huts from bamboo, thatch, and pounded earth for the Buddha and the older bhikkhus. The Buddha's hut, though small, was quite lovely. Behind it grew a thicket of golden bamboo, and to one side grew a thicket of taller green bamboo, which provided cool shade. Bhikkhu Nagasamala built a low, wooden platform for the Buddha to sleep upon. He also placed a large earthenware vessel for washing behind the Buddha's hut. Nagasamala was a young bhikkhu who had been Uruvela Kassapa's disciple. He was asked by Kassapa to serve as an attendant to the Buddha when the Sangha moved to bamboo forest. Sariputta arranged with a lay disciple from the capital to have a large bell donated to bamboo forest monastery. He hung it from the branch of an ancient tree near Kalandaka Lake. The bell was used to announce times for study and meditation, and became a special part of the practice of mindfulness. The Buddha taught his bhikkhus to pause and observe their breath whenever they heard the bell ring. Lay disciples assisted in many ways. Kassapa explained to them about the retreat season. This retreat season will afford all the bhikkhus an opportunity to practice the way of liberation directly under the guidance of the Buddha. They will have time for more intensive study and practice. At the same time, they will avoid accidentally crushing worms and insects on the ground during the rainy season. You can assist the Sangha during these 3 months of retreat by bringing food offerings. If possible, please try to coordinate your efforts to assure that there is the right amount of food each day, neither too much nor too little. Even the poorest of the poor, those who can only offer a chapati or 2, will be invited to stay and listen to the Buddha or one of the senior students give a discourse on the Dharma each day. The retreat season will benefit bhikkhus and lay disciples alike. Kassapa proved to be as talented at organizing the laity as he was at organizing the bhikkhus. He met with lay sponsors of the monastery and helped them organize the food offerings and other forms of assistance. He assured that every bhikkhu received a robe, begging bowl, meditation cushion, towel, and water filter for personal use. The first day of the retreat arrived, and the Sangha followed the schedule that had been carefully thought out by the Buddha and his senior students. The wake-up bell rang at 4 in the morning. After washing up, the bhikkhus did walking meditation on their own. They continued to alternate sessions of sitting and walking meditation until the sun peeked over the tops of the bamboos. Normally, that was the time to go begging, but since during the retreat food was brought to them by the laity, the bhikkhus had some extra time to meet with their individual teachers to study the Dharma in greater depth and to discuss any difficulties they were having in their practice. Bhikkhus who served as teachers were selected according to the depth of progress they had made on the path. Elders such as Kondana, Assaji, Kassapa, Sariputta, Moggallana, Vappa, and Mahanama each guided 50 or 60 younger bhikkhus. Other teachers were given responsibility for 10 to 30 students. Every new bhikkhu was assigned a personal teacher who served as his elder brother in the practice. Kassapa and Sariputta personally organized this system. Shortly before midday, the bhikkhus gathered by the lake and stood in lines holding their begging bowls. Food was divided and shared equally. When everyone had been served, they all sat on the grassy shores and ate in silence. When the meal was completed and the bowls washed, everyone turned towards the Buddha. On some days he directed his teaching to the bhikkhus, but in a way which was also helpful to the laity. On other days he directed his teaching to the laity, but in a way which also benefited the bhikkhus. Sometimes his teaching was addressed especially to the children present. In those Dharma talks, he often told past life tales. Sometimes one of the Buddha's senior students gave the Dharma talk in his place. The Buddha would sit and listen serenely, offering words of encouragement when he saw that the Dharma was expressed in a correct and clear manner. After the Dharma talks, the lay disciples would return home, and the bhikkhus would rest until the afternoon bell announced the time to resume sitting and walking meditation. The bhikkhus practiced until midnight, before retiring. The Buddha sat in meditation far into the night. He liked to place his bamboo platform outside his hut and sit on it, enjoying the cool night air, especially on nights with a moon. Before dawn, he liked to do walking meditation around the lake. Ever joyous, peaceful, and relaxed, the Buddha did not require as much sleep as the younger bhikkhus. Kassapa sat in meditation far into the night also. King Bimbisara visited Bamboo Forest faithfully. He did not bring great numbers of guests as he had the time he visited Palm Forest. Sometimes he was accompanied by Queen Videhi and Prince Ajatasattu. Often he came alone. He would leave his carriage at the edge of the forest and walk on his own to the Buddha's hut. One day, after seeing the bhikkhus listening to the Dharma talk in the rain, he asked the Buddha's permission to build a large Dharma hall where the bhikkhus could both eat and listen to the teaching without being drenched by the rain. The Buddha consented, and work on the hall began right away. It was large enough to shelter more than 1,000 bhikkhus and 1,000 lay disciples. The Dharma hall was a most helpful addition to the monastery. The Buddha and the king often sat together on the bamboo platform while carrying on conversations. Then Nagasamala built some simple bamboo chairs to enable the Buddha to receive guests more easily. One day, as the Buddha and the king sat on two of these chairs, the king confided, "I have another son that you have not yet met. I would like very much for you to meet him and his mother. He is not the child of Queen Videhi. His mother's name is Ambapali and his name is Jivaka. He will soon be 16 years old. Ambapali lives in Versali, north of the city Patalipata. She does not like the confined life of the palace, and she is not concerned about titles or prestige. She treasures only her own freedom. I have provided them with several means of support, including a beautiful mango grove. Jivaka is a diligent and intelligent boy who is not at all interested in military or political affairs. He is living near the capital, pursuing medical studies. I love them deeply and hope you will love them too. O compassionate one, if you would agree to meet Jivaka and his mother, I will ask them to come to Bamboo Forest in the near future." The Buddha quietly smiled in agreement. The king joined his palms and departed, his heart filled with gratitude. During that same period, Bamboo Forest Monastery received two very special guests who had come all the way from Kapilavatthu, the Buddha's home. They were the Buddha's old friend, Cloudtts, and Channa, who had driven the Buddha's carriage. Their presence imparted a special warmth to the monastery. The Buddha had been absent for more than 7 years, and he was anxious to hear news of home. He asked Cloudtts about the king and queen, Yasodhara, Nanda, Sundari Nanda, his friends, and of course, his son Rahula. Though Cloudtts was still hale and hearty, his face bore the lines of age. Channa looked older too. The Buddha spoke with them for a long time as they sat outside his hut. He learned that Cloudtts now held considerable rank at court and was one of King Suddhodana's most trusted advisers. News that the Buddha had attained the way and was teaching in Magadha had reached Kapilavatthu 2 months previously. Everyone rejoiced at the news, especially the king and queen and Gopa. The king, much to Cloudtts' pleasure, had sent Cloudtts to invite the Buddha to return home. He took 3 days to prepare for the journey, unable to sleep at night for sheer excitement. Yasodhara suggested he take Channa along. Channa was so happy when Cloudtts agreed that he openly wept. It took the 2 men nearly a month to reach Bamboo Forest Monastery. According to Cloudtts, the king's physical health had declined in recent years, though he was still quite alert mentally. The king had several talented advisers to help him run the country. Gautama was as robust as ever. Prince Nanda was now a young man and engaged to a young noblewoman named Kalyani. Nanda was very handsome and liked to dress in fine clothes, but the king was concerned that Nanda still lacked a certain stability and maturity. Sundari Nanda, the Buddha's sister, was now a beautiful and graceful young woman. As for Yasodhara, she had given up wearing all jewelry the day the Buddha departed. She dressed very simply and had sold all her precious possessions in order to give the money to the poor. When she learned that the Buddha ate no more than one meal a day, she began to do the same. She had continued her relief work with the active support of Queen Gautama. Rahula was now a healthy and handsome boy of 7. His black eyes flashed with intelligence and determination. His grandparents dearly cherished him, just as they had cherished Siddhartha as a boy. Channa confirmed all that Cloudtts told the Buddha. The Buddha's heart was warmed by all the news of home. Finally, Cloudtts asked the Buddha when he might return to Kapilavatthu. The Buddha said, "I will return after the rainy season. I do not want to leave the young bhikkhus here until they are more firmly anchored in their practice. After this period of retreat, I will feel more at ease about leaving them." "But Cloudtts, Channa, why don't you remain here yourselves for a month or so to taste this life? That will still allow you plenty of time to return to Kapilavatthu and inform the king that I will be back after monsoon season." Cloudtts and Channa were delighted to remain as guests at Bamboo Forest Monastery. They made friends with many of the bhikkhus and were able to taste the joyous and peaceful life of one who leaves home to follow the way. They learned how practicing the way of awareness in daily life could nourish the mind and heart. Cloudtts spent much time at the Buddha's side and observed him carefully. He was deeply moved by the Buddha's wondrous ease. It was clear that the Buddha had attained a state in which he no longer chased after any desire. The Buddha was like a fish swimming freely or a cloud floating peacefully in the sky. He dwelled completely in the present moment. The Buddha's eyes and smile were evidence of the wonderful liberation his spirit enjoyed. Nothing in this world bound him, and yet no one else possessed so great an understanding and love for others as he did. Cloudtts saw that his old friend had left him far behind on the spiritual path. Suddenly, Cloudtts found himself longing for the serene, unfettered life of a bhikkhu. He felt ready to abandon all rank, wealth, and prestige, and all the worries and anxieties that accompanied such a life. After spending just 7 days at Bamboo Forest, he confided his wish to be ordained as a bhikkhu to the Buddha. The Buddha looked somewhat surprised, but then he smiled and nodded his head in acceptance. Channa felt the same desire to become a bhikkhu, but, aware of his duty to the royal family, he reflected that he should not become a bhikkhu without first asking Yasodhara's leave. He resolved to wait until the Buddha returned to Kapilavatthu before making his request.